What's up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of Foul Ball Talk on all things Baltimore sports. I'm the host, Matt Trigger. With me is my co-host, Tim Malarkey. This episode is brought to you by Great Eights Memorabilia in Parkville, Maryland. We have a very special episode of Foul Ball Talk today. Tim, we have a very special guest from ESPN, Baseball Tonight fame, baseball Hall of Fame writer, um, multiple time New York best-selling author, Tim Kurkjian from ESPN. Hey, how's it going, Tim?
Good, Matt. Good, Tim. How you doing?
It's great to finally sit down and talk some baseball with you again, Tim. I want to thank you for coming on. I know that we last talked on screen around the 2023 All-Star break, and here we are, just about 6 weeks out from that time period. Again, the Baltimore Orioles are rolling, and we are starting to, get a picture of what this baseball team is made of this year. Want to open it up to you, Tim. How do you think the Orioles are looking so far?
Well, they're really good. The Yankees are really good too, but the Orioles have now got starting pitching 6 deep in their rotation. I called the game last night on the radio, and Grayson Rodriguez was great. First 5 innings, he didn't give up a hit. There was virtually no hard contact against him in 6 innings yesterday. Now, the bullpen had a tough day, and they only scored 3 runs, but Luis Castillo was pitching. The bottom line is the Orioles starting pitching is really good. They're going to have to send a really good one, Cole Irvin maybe, to the bullpen because they don't have enough spots. Imagine saying that 5 years ago. It just shows you where this rotation is now that Bradish is back, now that Means is back, Grayson is back, and, of course, you got the big fella at the top of the rotation. I would be very, very encouraged if I were an Oriole fan where this team is right now, because when you have this kind of starting pitching and you lead the major leagues in home runs, you're going to have a shot virtually every night. So there is no doubt in my mind they'll be close. They'll be over 90 wins and close to 100 or around 100. The Yankees are really good, but the Orioles are going to make the playoffs because this wave of young players is just continuous, and I really like where they are right now.
Absolutely, they're trending in the right direction. We're around a 667 win percentage. Through the first 42 games. Lost a heartbreaker last night. Like you said, Grayson pitched 6 wonderful innings, didn't allow a hit through the first 5, and then it just seems like once the bullpen, came into the game, things just kind of fell apart, and we ended up losing 4-3. But what do you think about the Orioles bullpen so far this year?
Well, that's the only real, and I don't really call it a weak point because it hasn't been a weak point to this, but it is a concern because you don't have Felix Bautista, and Craig Kimbrell just hasn't looked exactly like the great Craig Kimbrell of the past. Cano had a little trouble yesterday. Coulomb finally had a bad outing. But the bottom line is they have enough resources in the minor leagues to go get whatever they want for the stretch run, whatever they want at the trade deadline. And Mike Elias has now proven that he is willing to trade a couple of young guys to go get what he needs to not just get to October, but do something in October. So I fully expect them to upgrade this bullpen at the trade deadline with somebody who can really help. Now, it's hard to tell who's out there. Estevez for the Angels might be out there. He's might be an upgrade, but these are the kind of things that you have to look at over the next 3 months. But they are in a great position to make a deal because of the resources that they have.
Yeah, and Tim, that kind of leads me into a question that I was going to bring up with you is, we have the assets and we're sitting in a pretty position that, as Orioles fans, we haven't been in before, where we're talking about we have a gridlock, so to speak, of these players that are, waiting to make the lineup, and they're being, they're just sitting down in the minors cooking, so to speak. But one way, that is causing it to sort of be uncertain is when you have guys like Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Grayson Rodriguez, Jackson Holiday. These guys are going to have to get paid at some point. And how do you foresee it, coming down to like how can an organization afford or go out there and be able to pay a numerous amount of payers like this?
Well, again, not not every team is going to be able to pay its best three players for that length of time. But if you're really interested in keeping this together for the next 5 to 10 years, then you have to sign the catcher, the shortstop, and Jackson Holiday once he gets up and fully make sure that he belongs in the big leagues. Now, I had a nice chat with David Rubenstein yesterday during the rain delay. And he's a very down-to-earth guy. He's also a very rich guy. And he also loves baseball, and he loves the Orioles. That's what I gathered in my 15-minute chat with him yesterday. And given how engaged he has been at the ballpark with the team, Mr. Splash, walking across the street to Pickles, I just can't see him as the type that would look at Gunnar Henderson and say, we just can't afford him. If you're interested in being great, Gunnar has to be the first guy you sign. Adley has to be the second guy you sign. And then once Jackson Holiday gets his feet under him on the major league level, he probably has to be the third. So can they afford all three? That remains to be seen. But if they can lock up two of them long term, that would be, I would think, a mild success. All three would be a slam dunk. We'll see what David Rubenstein could do. But he spent $1.6 billion to buy the team. I can't imagine him saying, all right, we're going to cut back, not move forward.
Yep, that's the same boat that I'm thinking too. Me and Matt go back and forth all the time, and if you had to pick Adley or Gunnar, who's getting it first? And we both always fall to the shortstop position, but at the same time, then you get into talking about who his agent is and when do you think that contract will be able to be signed, and it leads on. But Matt, what do you got for us?
I was in the same boat as Tim was saying, where Gunnar has to be the first guy signed. And Tim, you've been around the game for decades, and usually Scott Boras doesn't play ball this early on in a player's contract with so many years of arbitration eligibility remaining. Do you see that as a roadblock to a potential Gunnar Henderson extension?
Well, Scott Boras is always a roadblock. Most agents can be roadblocks, and we all understand that. But again, when you're talking about a 22-year-old shortstop who hit more home runs before May than any 22-year-old in the history of baseball, when you see how big he is, when you see how strong and how fast and how good a shortstop he is, and then when you watch him hustling in the ninth inning of a 9-2 game that has been delayed by rain, you recognize this is the exact guy you have to re-sign. Now, you got to do it early if you can, but if the agent's going to say we're not going to do it, sometimes it's best that the player looks at the agent and says, I want to stay here. Let's work something out. It's been done, even with Scott Boras. Let's hope for the Orioles' sake that's what happens here, because it doesn't matter what team you are. It saddens me when a player gives somebody 6 great years and then suddenly he's gone. I understand how the rules work, but that's a little bit sad sometimes to see someone makes his mark and then before you know it, he's off to someplace else.
Yeah, it almost reminds you of the Manny Machado situation, to where Manny gave us really a handful of great seasons here in Baltimore, and then because they knew they weren't going to be able to afford him under the old regime, the old ownership, that they traded him away. And we don't want to see that happen again with Gunnar. There's no way that it should happen with Gunnar. And like you said, Adley should be number 2. Arguably, I think Adley could be the first extension just because of Boras. And I think Adley would be willing to play ball. Speaking of Adley, Tim, I wanted to ask you, his splits at catcher and DH are nearly 60-40 this year. With the rule changes and all that, everybody thought that he took a step back defensively. Do you see Adley being our long-term catcher in Baltimore, or do you see him eventually doing the Joe Mauer phase to first base?
No, I see him being the catcher, and he should be the catcher. When you have a catcher, you need him to catch for as long as you can, because the production he brings behind the plate, which is traditionally not an offensive position, you need that back there. He made a throw last night that looked like the younger Adley, and it was tremendous. I think he's still good behind the plate. I know the pitchers still love throwing to him. But they have a backup in James McCann, who granted doesn't hit much, but he's a veteran. He is a tough guy. He knows how to run a pitching staff. I have no problem with giving Adley a bunch of days off here and there as a catcher in order to keep him fresh. This is what we're doing with all of our players these days, is trying to, we call it load management now. We don't want anyone to get overwhelmed or beaten up, and a catcher's going to start with that. So I wouldn't look at it like Adley isn't catching as much, he's going to move to first base. I look at it like we're going to extend Adley's career as a catcher by allowing him to have a bunch of days at DH. Now, if you didn't have a backup catcher, you didn't have a reliable veteran back there, maybe that changes things, but you do, because James McCann knows exactly what he's doing back there.
Okay, that's a very fair assessment. So, looking with how deep the Orioles minor league system is at that position, what do you do with Basayo?
Well, again, this is the problem with the Orioles system. They have really good young players at every position. I think we can all agree that Kobe Mayo would probably be in the big leagues for about 20 teams right now. Yeah. He'd probably be starting for 20 teams, and maybe 29 of them he'd make the club, but not here. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later. But this is the embarrassment of riches that the Orioles have in their minor league system. And you can't worry about a kid coming up because, hey, they got two catchers and one's a veteran backup. Those things generally sort themselves out. When the guy is ready, they'll bring him up. And the Orioles have been very, very cautious about not rushing a guy to the big league. So when he's ready, he'll be up. So
that segues me into something that we alluded to a little bit earlier, Tim, and just want to get your thoughts of being around the game for so long and having, a plethora of information and seeing so many years of so many great players. Being a Baltimore or Maryland native, how passionate us O's fans can be. And it was sort of like the sky was falling when Jackson Holliday got sent down around here. So I just kind of wanted to get your perspective of what you see on the guy, how you think he's going to do, how you think he's, how it does for the mental sending him back, just your overall perspective on what you think Jackson Holliday is going to become.
Well, I'm surprised he struggled like he did. But I am not worried about Jackson Holliday. I've told you guys before, this is the hardest game in the world to play. And when a young guy who has torn it up wherever he has been gets to the big leagues for the first time and, very small sample, fails for the first time in his life, that is a difficult situation and an adjustment to make. And I am 100% certain he will make that adjustment. He will be an everyday player in the major leagues for the Orioles very soon, and he will be very productive. Never forget, even Mike Trout's first year, he struggled a little bit. Alex Rodriguez's first year, they sent him out. And the next year he came back and hit, 352 or something. I mean, these things happen. Willie Mays got off to a short but terrible start. All sorts of great players have a hard time playing this game the first time on the major league level. This isn't like basketball. This isn't like football. These guys come out of college playing a big-time college program. They're ready for the NBA. They're ready for the NFL. But the big leagues is such a difficult sport, the ultimate, for me, skill sport. And sometimes you just get overwhelmed by it. That's what happened to Jackson Holliday, and it won't happen the next time.
That's fair. I tend to agree with you. We were both a little bit disappointed that Jackson struggled the way he did, but we know that he's going to be our everyday second baseman relatively soon. But more on the makeup of the current big league roster with the Orioles. When is it time to say when with Cedric Mullins is our starting everyday center fielder? Because the defense is elite, but the offense, when you're batting under 200, you can't have that in a lineup when you're ready to compete right now.
Yeah, it's a tricky spot. There's no doubt. Brandon Hyde told me on Friday, he said, we are a completely different team offensively when Cedric is really swinging the bat. And that simply hasn't happened this year. In the perfect world, he finds his swing. He's the everyday center fielder. For the moment, you could platoon Hayes and Cowser in left field and have a really nice situation there. But if Mullins is going to continue to labor, Cowser is going to play some center as he did the other night. He can play center field, but they're a much better team when Cedric Mullins is better than this, and he has really struggled. And I watched him last Saturday, and he dropped down a bunt and got a hit because I think he just needs a knock to get him going here. But if this doesn't get a whole lot better, they're going to have to make a change. And I don't see that happening soon because you're right. The defense is elite, and this is an elite defensive team. And they don't want to change that in the outfield or the infield, but at some point they're going to have to get more production from center field than Mullins is giving them.
Because it's creating a situation in our lineup, Tim, where Gunnar Henderson leads the entire league in home runs, and 12 out of his 14 home runs are solo shots, and he doesn't have anybody on base in front of him for run production. So that it's almost like a skewed, stat line for Gunnar. He should not be a leadoff guy. He should be batting 3 or 4, and he does some days. And we had Jordan Westberg leading off a couple times in the last week or so, but not having Mullins batting his normal leadoff spot has really hindered the run production for this team, I believe.
Yeah, and I agree. I would hit Gunnar in the middle of the order, but he's also got 4 leadoff home runs this year. And that gets the Orioles off to a pretty good start. But in a perfect world, when you got a guy with 14 homers, you hit him third. But he's such a great leadoff guy. You look at their left field production now that Cowser has slowed down a little bit, and Hayes is off to a slow start, and center fielder hasn't given them much. It's pretty amazing. They're still leading the league in home runs without as much from left and center, because normally you're supposed to get quite a bit of production from each spot. So a lot of time left. And again, if they're short a bat at the trade deadline, I repeat, they have people in the minor leagues that can go get you a veteran hitter, or maybe, the Heston Kjerstad's are back, or Mayo's up and he's hitting. I mean, they just have so many options, and very few teams have as many options as the Orioles do.
That's very true. Tim, you want to take this?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Tim, if you think there's a lot of talk of this 6-man rotation possibly coming around with now that Grayson is back, Means and Bradish are pitching, Irvin possibly to the bullpen, most likely scenario. We don't know much information about Wells, but from what it is, it doesn't sound good. Do you think that this current Orioles rotation is sustainable, especially when it comes time to make a push for the playoffs?
I do. I think they have 6 quality major league starting pitchers now, and not many teams can say that. But I'm not in favor of a 6-man rotation. I think Corbin Burns needs to pitch more than that, and they need him every 5th day. He's one of the best pitchers in the game. I don't want him every 6 games. I want him every 5th game for sure. And Irvin has pitched all sorts of places. He can go to the bullpen for a while. We know somebody's going to get hurt because pitchers always get hurt. So having 6 now is a luxury. It's a great thing. Just shift somebody to the bullpen, go with 5, keep them on their regular turn, and see how things go. If somebody starts to break down or get tired, then you go to 6. But I'm a big believer in 5. You got to remember, fellas, I'm 67 years old. I grew up at a time where Orioles broke camp with 8 pitchers one year. And Earl Weaver told me years later, he said, I would have broken with 7, but the general manager wouldn't let me. But those were the days that McNally, Palmer, Cuellar, Pat Dobson, the rest of them came out of spring training ready to throw 9 innings. Those days are over, and they're never coming back. But I still think 6 is too many. 5 is the perfect amount. For the Orioles' sake, let's get their best pitchers out there every 5th day.
And to kind of jump on what you said with the injury aspect, is it alarming how many Tommy John surgeries there are every single year?
Yeah, and I'm worried about it like everybody else. And let's be realistic. This is not something new. We've been talking about this for 10 to 15 years. It's just really come to the front this year with the more and more and some really high-powered, high-quality pitchers such as Shane Bieber and Spencer Strider. But bottom line is the industry has demanded that our pitchers throw as hard as they can on every pitch. They have told them the higher the velocity, the better chance you're going to get to the big leagues, stay in the big leagues, and make a lot of money. The higher your spin rate is, the better you can, spin a breaking ball, the better chance you're going to have to stay. The more bats that you miss, the more people that you strike out, the better the chance you have to do some things in this game. So what else would a pitcher do other than follow the rules of the industry? And this is the biggest reason we're having all of these arm injuries. Is it's a max effort situation, virtually every pitch for almost every pitcher in the major leagues. And the only way to correct this is to literally go back to Little League and start to tell the 10 and 12-year-olds, look, you don't have to throw every pitch as hard as you can. We don't want you to spin a breaking ball when you're 11 years old. And you don't have to strike everybody out. You don't have to miss bats. Let's put a ball in play on the first pitch once in a while and let your defense make the play. But this is what the industry has demanded. And I think we need to make a change here. But that change is going to be subtle, and it's going to take a long time. And in the meantime, more pitchers are going to get hurt.
And it's crazy because one of the greatest pitchers of all time never threw hard. It was Greg Maddux, and he had excellent pinpoint, control and location. And it seems like that's not even emphasized for pitchers these days.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to people in the game, and maybe they're exaggerating, that Greg Maddux wouldn't even get a look today as a professional baseball player because he doesn't throw hard enough. But this is what we have to get past, is the art of pitching is still an incredibly important part of the game. I mean, look at that Shota Imanaga guy for the Cubs. He doesn't throw 100. He doesn't have a spin rate off the charts, but he's got a really good understanding of the art of pitching. And we need to get back to that. But I repeat, it's not easy to do that. To tell somebody who's throwing 100 miles an hour, hey, we want you to throw 94 instead to save your arm long term. And we don't want you to spin that breaking ball quite as hard. Well, that's not very easy to do, to tell somebody to not try as hard. They've all been encouraged to do this. This is what they've learned to do, and it's going to be very hard to change. It's almost like it's too late for a lot of guys. So these adjustments are going to have to be made at a much younger age than pro ball and certainly the big leagues.
No, I agree. We had a chance to sit down with Josh Towers, and he alluded to the same thing. He said it even starts with these kids in Little League now and what they're being, how these pitchers are being trained. He said he's seen them, being taught to throw into a net from 3 feet away as hard as they can. So I definitely agree with you there that it's just changed on a whole level, nationwide, starting from the youth camps. And it's interesting that when we've seen this change in pitching with everybody chasing the high velocity, the high spin rate, that we've also now instituted a pitch clock, which again speeds up, it adds to the game and the frequency of these pitches at the high velocities being thrown. So,
yeah, and the pitch clock is not necessarily really hurting anything. I don't believe that. But sure, when you're in a hurry as a pitcher and you have to rush something and you look at that clock and you throw a non-competitive pitch, or you throw a pitch that maybe you're not ready to throw because your body isn't ready to throw it, sure, that potentially could lead to something. But I'm not buying that the pitch clock is the reason that these pitchers have gotten hurt. We didn't have a pitch clock 2 years ago, and guys were getting hurt all the time. Again, it comes down to high velo and just the need to throw everything at max effort, and that's going to eventually have to change.
Awesome.
So, Tim, I wanted to kind of, get back to the roster itself again. I know we've kind of visited that a couple times. Tim and I like to do our put on the fantasy general manager hat sometimes and talk about trade scenarios. Now, I know it's the middle of May, and like you said, we have a plethora of talent. And closer seems to be our biggest issue right now in terms of a consistent night in and night out kind of a closer for us. The name Mason Miller has come up an awful lot, but he's got 5.5 years of control contractually. So I know that's going to be a king's ransom. on top of the fact that he doesn't have a whole lot of major league appearances to justify what could potentially be a trade. Do you see, like you said, the Los Angeles Angels closer being an option, or somebody like Tanner Scott coming back to Baltimore from Miami, or maybe a Michael Kopech?
Yeah, all of those guys are options. The problem is in today's game with 6 playoff teams in each league, teams are going to be hesitant to trade a pitcher who could help them potentially make the playoffs, because this is the one game, if you get in the playoffs, you're going to have a chance to not only get to the World Series but win it. I mean, look at the Diamondbacks last year. They snuck in with 84 wins and went to the World Series. So can the Cardinals give up Ryan Helsley, their closer, who's got great stuff? And can you do that in St. Louis, even though they played poorly and they're in a winnable division? Can you do that now? I don't think so. So you have to look at teams that are hopelessly out of it, and that is the Marlins and the White Sox and the Rockies and ultimately the A's. And, Mason Miller would be the perfect choice for any team. He throws 104 miles an hour. He is the most dominant pitcher in the major leagues right now. His stuff is unbelievably good. But what's it going to take to get a 1-inning relief pitcher? How much are the Orioles going to have to give up? Because I think that the A's would deal him, but they're going to want the Orioles' 3 best prospects in order to get a 1-inning relief pitcher. Now, is it worth it? That would be a question for Mike Elias. But I think the Orioles, again, are in a good position to go get some late-inning bullpen help. I just think Mason Miller at this point is going to be a little bit expensive.
Yeah. Tim.
No, I agree. And that's the thing we've seen floating around on all of the social media interwebs for Baltimore fans is all of these proposed packages. And, people bring up 2 names, 1 name, and I tend to lean to the more so fact that if Oakland, that's kind of their ticket to click, and they're going to want a lot more than what I think Orioles fans and the Orioles front office are going to be willing to give.
Yeah, again, general managers make all their money at the trade deadline. Are we in or are we out? Are we going to mortgage part of the future to try to win right now? And again, the Orioles have been hesitant to do that until they went and got Corbin Burnes. So maybe they've changed their philosophy. Maybe 101 wins and a packed Camden Yards with everyone dressed in orange again, and we haven't won the World Series or been there since '83. Maybe this is enough to say we got to take a chance. We got to do it now. But again, that's a difficult decision when you have been building this team for 5 or 6 years now and gone through all that losing. You don't want to just give away all your young people. But I repeat, when you can get a difference maker who can turn you from a non-contender into a contender, or in the Orioles case, a really good contender into a world champion, you have to take that opportunity. But it's not easy to do, especially if you're built like Mike Elias.
No, I fully agree. I think that, the whole trust in Mike, I just sit tight and I keep reassuring people that tune in and listen to us talk about the O's every week that Mike's got a plan, and let it run its course. It'll come.
Right. He's very, very good at this. And I would have great faith if I were an Oriole fan that the general manager is going to make the right move. Maybe a year ago, I don't think we all thought that, but the Corbin Burnes trade changed a lot of that thinking for me. And now we'll see what the next move is, and is it a really big one or a much smaller one?
Well, there you have it, Tim. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking Orioles baseball with you. You're one of the best to ever do it. And before we let you go, is there anything you want to promote, a book, or if you want to promote your social media or anything?
Well, my son Jeff and I do a podcast like you guys do. We're
Awesome.
on week number 10. It's called Is This Great Game or What?, which was the name of my second book. And my son is 30, and he does morning radio, not sports, music talk. in Philadelphia, and we do a father-son baseball podcast that runs every Tuesday. We tape it every Monday. It is joyful. It is playful. There's no heavy lifting here. We're trying to make you laugh, and we're trying to teach you something. Learn and laugh is the way we think about it. And we've had some really great guests on, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it because I get to talk baseball for an hour and a half once a week, and I'm doing it with my son, who, this is a dream come true for, old dad here. So it's really been going well, and I hope to continue it for the rest of the year, and we'll see about where it goes after that.
Fantastic. That's an amazing thing, and we're very happy for you. This is therapeutic right here. We love exuding our Orioles fandom through our platform we have. And at the request of my co-host here, he's been trying to figure out, what he was going to ask you, but I'm going to do it for you. He wants to hear the Baltimore accent.
I was going to say it doesn't, I don't do it justice of my childhood if I get to talk to you, Tim, and your good pal, Scott Van Pelt. And, growing up and seeing you two banter about that Baltimore accent is part of my young sports memories from sitting on the couch late night watching ESPN. So, in the fashion of Scott Van Pelt from the active roster today, I would have to say my pick to click is going to be Jorge Mateo.
Yesterday, fellas, I was at the ballpark, and 5 different people, 5, came up to me, didn't even say hello, just told me how much they love Scott and I talking about the Baltimore accent. Not what do you think of Gunnar Henderson or what do you think of Corbin Burns? They just said, can we talk to you about the Baltimore accent? That's how much people love it. And the takeaway there, fellas, is we're covering sports for a living. We're covering baseball for a living. It's okay to have a good chuckle once in a while, especially when you're covering this sport. So Scott's the best. He makes me laugh out loud all the time. I can't do the accent like he can, so I'm not even going to try. Every time he says Joe Flacco, I think people just laugh out loud. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it is really fun, and I'm in as long as there's a good laugh to go with it.
Oh, thank you so much. You at least gave us Joe Flacco. That's good enough for my ears, and I know everybody that's watching appreciates it. Tim, thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck to you with your son for your guys' baseball podcast. We'll definitely give it a listen. We love listening to you talk. You've been a part of our childhood and our adulthood for 3 decades. I've been watching ESPN, baseball tonight as long as I can remember. I know Tim has as well. Thank you so much, Tim, and it's been a pleasure.
Tim, it's been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Tim. Talk to you guys soon.
There you have it, folks. We will be back Wednesday this week with our recap of the Mariners series. And who's after the Mariners?
We got Cardinals.
The Mariners and the Cardinals. We'll recap that on Wednesday night. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. That was one of the best experiences of the baseball season for me so far. Tim?
By far.
Go ahead and close the show, man.
All right. Y'all hop right over. The game's going live in 5 minutes now. And you heard me tell Tim, but that pick to click today. Watch the boy Jorge Mateo. Fun fact, I'm saying two run game and a stolen base from that second baseman. Lock it in.
There you go, folks. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you all Wednesday night, 8 p.m.